Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 248, and I am your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. With me, I have footage from Under Construction, sped up 8 times, as you might expect. We have made our triumphant return here to the YouTubes, resuming our regularly scheduled programming, although this is a little bit late. I've been a little bit sick. I think I picked up something on the plane. But, anyways, this question that we're covering today was asked in Zombie Train, episode 211. So let me go find the full text of the question for better clarification. Where is it? There we go. Mike Pericolosi. Did you guys ever try and restore the 3750 or the 6755 for the speed and possible double heading in case of emergencies? Well, to answer the question simply, we didn't do it for that reason. They were good, solid engines, and we went after them for the sake of the Zombie Train Incorporated. But because of the fact that they're both stored outside, and they have been for many years, they weren't in the shape for us to go running after immediately. They weren't really considered as backup engines. Engines that were already operating were ones that we considered for our own purposes, including 765, which I've talked about, which eventually was sort of bequeathed to the Toronto Rail Lands as we went west, because they were doing a lot of our work for us, basically. They handled stuff back east while we were out west, before the Zombie Train Incorporated started, and moreover, they handled stuff up north when we were down south. They did a lot of work. They did a lot more than you might expect of your average, just random, group. But I feel like they owed it. I feel like they felt like they owed it to us. So they went out of their way to make sure they did what we would be doing in the meantime, and they would call on the radio periodically to ask if there's anything that we needed them to do. So they weren't just looking out for themselves, and they weren't just looking out for who they came across. They were looking out for our interests as well, which was very nice of them. They weren't the only group to do this, but they were probably the most successful and the most pervasive. They did the most. There was a contingent of people in Strasbourg, or East Strasbourg, in that area, mostly Amish people that had managed to survive by their own ingenuity, or people that had managed to survive and ended up with the Amish, and that's a particularly good place to be in the apocalypse, because they're used to getting by without the niceties of the modern world. And so when we rolled up and basically started ransacking the steam shop, we got an awful lot of questions, because they were using at least one of the engines, or intending to use, just in order to get places that were distant, and they had everything they needed to do that, but they couldn't do it for very long because they didn't really have that much in the way of supplies. They didn't have that much coal. I don't know if it was because someone had used it, or Strasbourg was low on coal when when World War Z began. Honestly, it was towards the end of the season for them, so I would not be surprised if that were the case. But at any rate, that's just how it was when we arrived. They wanted to use the engine. They were very hesitant to. I think they had one run that they could talk to us about, where they went out as far as Harrisburg. Not that that's all that far. Well, it's a distance. But they went out as far as Harrisburg and then came back. I don't know what they got or what they were looking to find, or, whatever. I didn't get the details of that. But the thing that I did get was these guys were capable of running an engine. And, of course, the reason we were there the first time was just to see what was available. We knew they had at least 2 functional engines. Pretty sure they only had 2 at this point, not a third one running. And we wanted that, so that's why we were in the area. We were looking for easily operable engines, which I was silly and didn't look as far as Essex. I ended up skipping that and then coming back to it later on recollection of where and what it was. But when we arrived there, we definitely took stock of the engines that were at the museum. And the stark difference between the ones that were stored inside and the ones that were stored outside cannot be overstated. And both 3750 and 6755 are both outdoor engines, and they have had both suffered immensely from the conditions that they were exposed to. And so immediately they were written off as ideas of, okay, we're not going to be doing anything with this. We eventually came back with Design Material Incorporated with the intent to use the shops in Strasbourg and the utilities and supplies over at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in order to restore as many engines as we possibly could, and I think we restored just about all of them by the time we began to dieselize. And those two being larger engines were close to the head of the list, even though they were in bad condition. Because there aren't too many indoor engines that were of that size. I'm not sure there were any. I'm not sure there are any, because the indoor engines are, consolidations and 10-wheelers and Americans and Atlantics. There aren't any really big engines that are stored inside. All of the bigger engines are destined for the roundhouse that they wanted to build, but had not broken ground on or done anything with. In fact, they hadn't even broken ground. They hadn't even really announced the project. It was on the drawing board, but aside from that, it wasn't going anywhere yet as of 2012. So, we were left with a museum that had a few prized pieces, and other than that, didn't have much at all. A few prized pieces that weren't going anywhere anytime soon anyways. The indoor engines there, the first time we came around, we just sort of looked at them and went, well, these would be nice, and then sort of left them at that, because there was nothing else that we could do, really. The Toronto Raillands paired with the guys from Fort Wayne, they were in there trying to work on that Berkshire right after we left, because we let them know the state of it, but I think they were a little bit hopeful. By the time we returned, it really hadn't gone anywhere. They had shuffled it out of where it was being held, where it's like crate area, and tried to get it inside, but ultimately failed, because there was just too much stuff cluttered in there, and they realized there wasn't really a purpose for getting it inside, because inside does not have the maintenance stuff that you would want or you would need. You really need to put it in the Strasbourg shops across the street, but they are not big enough for a Berkshire. At least that's what they deemed. I think they wanted to do it, but they were concerned, and they also didn't want to put perfectly good engines outside. So there was a lot of deliberation on their part. Meanwhile, I hesitate to call them Amish, because they're really not all Amish. They were of mixed background, but they were living Amishly. They were very hesitant to sort of let us do anything, and from when I arrived, I sort of let them know that they had dibs. We asked them if we could have their crane, and they said yeah, so we took it, and then we carried that around for years. But the engines there didn't go much of anywhere, not under us, not for a while. So, if that answers your question, I know it's not exactly the brightest, most wonderful thing in the world, but the fact of the matter was, we really didn't have anything to do with those particular engines, not from the beginning. When we came back, yeah, it was different. We had the supplies, we had the people, we had the reason to restore engines of that size and that quantity and that damage level, I guess. That state of disrepair, we had a reason to go out and and put effort into it, because if the Zombertrain Incorporated had never happened, I don't think we would have gone back for those engines particularly. Maybe some of the indoor ones, maybe whichever ones we deemed were good enough in there. Possibly one of the consolidations or both of the consolidations. I think there are 2 in there. Possibly the Atlantic as well. I know those engines ran out of boiler time, and that's why they got moved to the museum instead of being operated at Strasbourg. But all things considered, running out of boiler time and then being put inside is, it's pretty much peachy in terms of the fate of a locomotive. It is definitely not the worst thing in the world to happen. For example, running out of boiler time and being put outside for decades. That is pretty rough, especially after the boiler jacket gets removed and you have structural components exposed which do rust, which is exactly what happened to both of the engines. Actually, 6755 was in worse shape. It looked better almost, but it was in worse shape. We ended up finding some nice stuff in the tender, some parts for it and for the other engines, but it wasn't exactly, we weren't exactly about to jump on using those parts. It was definitely interesting interacting with the group that was over there, because, like I said, I didn't want to trample on whatever they wanted to do, but at the same time, I think both parties, I knew, and I'm pretty sure they knew, that they weren't going to do very much on their own. They were a little bit skittish about running their engines, and they didn't have a lot of supplies to do that, which is why I sat down and made a deal with them as quickly as it made sense to, which was about when the 765 guys came down, when the Toronto Raillands guys came down and started poking around. Because I knew that they were going to start to shift things around, and I also knew that they were going to be very competent caretakers of the locomotives and the area. They had plenty of experience, and I needed the Amish guys to trust us and to trust them. So I made sure to strike up a deal, which was we were going to provide them with anything they couldn't get there, or at the very least we would be privy to running errands for them as long as we were paid properly, which that deal worked out just fine. And on the flip side, we would be able to use the resources that they had, the engines that they had, however we saw fit. And we got like a mostly yes there. They didn't want to get left high and dry, and I made sure that they would always be left with at least one functioning engine. But then part of the deal became, okay, we need to get them a functioning engine that isn't one of the ones that's extremely useful to us. We jumped for 1223, but we ended up not being present long enough to really make a difference. The fact of the matter was, we had a lot to do. We had a lot of places to be, a lot of things that we needed to take care of, and each individual group, while we wanted to tend to them and sort out their every need, that would be needlessly difficult. So we started to work. The 765 guys started working on their mega project, and then we had to bid them adieu because we had other people that we needed to keep contact with, take care of, other deals that we made that we couldn't just abandon for the sake of hashing this other thing out. So we ended up leaving both of the Strasbourg engines there, and I know the 765 guys made use of one or both of them. One of them both being, I believe, I'm pretty sure it was 475 and 90 that were running at this point in time. And they were working on the other two, but no, maybe they did have three. I can't recall, but I know they made use out of them. So Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next week. Trainman out.